Once again, your host, Karen Hanan.
Thanks for staying with me here on Artbeat. For those just joining us, my guest is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the author of a current book called Nomad. Her previous book was called Infidel, and we're talking about her life and her work. Let's come forward now, Ayaan, and talk a little bit about Nomad. But before we do that, I'd like you to put in context the conversation we're having, so to make sure that people don't think we're simply Muslim bashing, because that's not at all what we're about here. We're talking essentially about fundamentalism, but put it in your words, please.
In my words, I would make a distinction between Islam and Muslims. Muslims are individual human beings. They're very diverse. They come from different countries, different ethnicities, different ages, and some of them are fundamentalists. Some of them don't practice at all. I would call them passive Muslims. And on the other hand, you have Islam, which is a set of beliefs. And the set of beliefs is three-dimensional. There's one dimension that's all about prayer, fasting. It deals with rituals of eating, life and death. And that is what I think in the definition of religion as Americans understand it is protected by the First Amendment. But Islam as a set of beliefs also has another dimension, a political dimension, and that how to govern a society, Sharia law, and it is intolerant of gay people, intolerant of infidels, apostates like me, people who leave the faith. And when we talk about radicalism, when we talk about fundamentalism, we are talking about people who want to follow that dimension of Islam and apply it in the 21st century in past Muslim societies and currently in Western societies.
And many of the Islamic countries are actually demanding the expansion of Sharia law. Can you just define Sharia law in a few words? I'm sure that's difficult, but just again to give people a feel for it.
Sharia law is the legal code that is derived or inspired by Muhammad, the founder of Islam. Exactly what the law is, you can find it in the Quran, in the holy book of the Muslims, which Muslims refer to as the Revelation. It's supplemented in the deeds, the sayings of Muhammad, and that's called the Hadith. What's not in the Quran and is not in the Hadith is again supplemented by scholars reaching an agreement on what that is, and that together is Islamic jurisprudence. A country like Saudi Arabia has the Quran as its constitution and has implemented Sharia law. And I think the most famous and cruel punishments that we know of from the media are the amputating of the hands of thieves, flogging people for adultery or stoning them to death, that sort of thing. What is less known is the social side, which is the family laws that pertain to marriage, divorce, and inheritance. And that part of Sharia law, which is very, very unfair to women and puts them in a position that almost strips them of their rights, that is not only implemented in countries as extreme as Saudi Arabia and Iran, but gradually you see it also implemented in Muslim country or Muslim majority countries that are secular and among Muslim communities in America and Europe.
And I think you've been very clear in talking about the threat you see of this kind of fundamentalist action, the Sharia law and so on, really to the Western world, and perhaps that we spend too much time in the West trying to be politically correct, and therefore are accepting some things that are simply unacceptable.
Yes, and I'll give you an example. When I was working in Parliament in the Netherlands, we touched on forcing girls into marriage. This was done by their parents. It's done in the home, the most intimate setting. And some of the legislators, some of the cultural commentators were pushing for us, the wider liberal society, to respect that type of a marriage arrangement. We were talking about female genital mutilation, which is not in the Quran. It's in some obscure hadith, but it's practiced mostly by Muslims. And in the Netherlands, it was practiced only by Muslims, in fact. And I couldn't understand why some of the legislators were making excuses for that and saying we shouldn't punish it even though it's punishable by law, but maybe we should just educate them into giving up the practice, which obviously people are not doing because they consider it a practice that they've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. Forced marriage. And then there were the honor killings. Honor killings were disapproved of unanimously, but the honor violence was also part of what, and this honor has to do when a girl leads a Western lifestyle or is attracted to a Western lifestyle, she is seen within her fundamentalist Muslim family as violating the honor code of the family, and it's followed, by warning her first, and if she refuses, by beating her, by locking her up, and finally by planning her murder. And this would be done by the whole family. And I just remember some of my Western friends saying, that's just how they do things, let's leave them alone, let's not bother them. I think, but what about the girl? What about the human rights of the victims, the wives, the girls? Why? And so you can see that there is a shift in the way we think about these things. There was the women's movement. We were very radical about protecting the rights of women, regardless of their ethnicity or wherever they came from. And now, more and more, you see people saying, maybe we should just respect their cultures. I've been to women's shelters in the Netherlands that are called Muslim women's shelters. These women's shelters have women who have been abused by their husbands or by their fathers, etc. And instead of emancipating these women, that's what these shelters used to be about. Now they have mediators, where the victim is made to promise to obey the family laws, and the family is promised to not abuse her. That is how we've moved, or we've drifted towards Sharia in that way.
Let's talk about Nomad, your new book. Essentially, this is the story of your life as what you describe as a wanderer in the West. But it's also the story of many immigrants to the West with a focus on women who live in tightly closed traditional Muslim cultures within the broadly open culture of America. I'm curious as to whether you see the story of Muslim immigrants as distinct from that of other immigrants from other countries and cultures. And if you do, how much of that is due to religion, in your opinion?
There are similarities between immigrants from Muslim countries and immigrants from non-Muslim countries, but there are also differences. The similarities are that you start off in a new place. You have to learn the language, you have to learn, the cultural codes, you have to adapt. And depending on how you come in and where you come in and, what your income is and your education is, that process of adaptation can be relatively easy or relatively hard. What makes adaptation for Muslim immigrants hard is the fact that parts of what they have to do to adapt means that they have to give up their religion, or it comes into conflict with their religion. Now, the most prominent example of this is women, young women who are attracted to a Western lifestyle, which is a form of adaptation, meaning that the girl at the age of 18 wants to be self-reliant, wants to have a career in life, wants to have the opportunity to choose her mate, and that choosing of the mate obviously is first of all a process of dating in order to know if this person is someone you want to spend the rest of your life with or not. That is a challenge to the Islamic code of the guardian, the father, choosing the mate for the young woman, where dating is not allowed, where the girl can't have a career of her own if her father doesn't want her to have that. She always completely has to obey her guardian. All of these things create a confrontation between Muslims who do want to adapt, and in doing so, who find themselves in a mental cognitive dissonance, because by adapting into Western society, they find themselves leaving parts of their religion. For men, young men, it's complicated even more by the Islamist movement that comes to young men and tells them, if you adapt to Western society, you are a kafir, you are an infidel, you are not a Muslim at all. And to be a good Muslim is to sign up for the jihad or holy war. that is the challenge that is facing young Muslims who are trying to adapt into Western society, that is not facing, say, young Vietnamese people or young Chinese or young people from India who are not faced with this. With their theology, with their religion, or the political dimension of their religions, actively setting out to stop them from adapting.
Okay. We have to take another short break. My guest is Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and we're talking about her life and also about her current book, Nomad. You can find out more about the book at ahafoundation.org, and we'll come back and talk more in just a moment. Stay with us.